Andy Heller, author of Take the High Road, Divorce with Compassion for Yourself and Your Family. Welcome to Lunch and a Divorce Lawyer, Andy.
Peter, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me as a guest.
Hey, so Andy, before we dig into like what's within the pages and the exciting topics within your book, give me like the the pre-book, like how did the book come into existence? Like every author, I don't know, Mark Twain probably has stories of how this book developed. How did your Huckleberry Finn take the high road? Sort of, what's the backstory? Why did it happen?
I'll give it to you in 3 or 4 minutes, Peter, which should be a good foundation for also taking us to some great banter back and forth and questions from you. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm a successful businessman. At least I think I'm successful. I've ran different businesses and it had nothing to do with divorce. And I had a challenge in divorce myself. And everybody has their own coping process, and mine is I just take notes, and I also read a lot. Okay, so during my own divorce, I'm taking these notes, and like when my mom was passing away in hospice, Peter, I took some notes, and my notes eventually became an article that got covered by 5 national newspapers in the Mother's Day after she passed. So I'm doing this thing with my divorce. I'm reading all the other books, and I don't mind saying, ladies and gentlemen, is I found this therapist who did a lot of work with divorced men. She was kind of a great rudder for me. And one time in particular, I walked in to her office, and Peter, a little bit about me, I'm that guy in every group of friends that is kind of reasonable, that people go to for, okay, this is my emotions are telling me what to do. Let me go talk to Andy. So I'm typically a reasonable, compromise-oriented guy. So something happened with my ex, and I go into the therapist's office and said, okay, this is what happened, but I thought it through, and here's what I'm going to do. And she went into all this therapy speak. Well, Andy, great that you've thought it through, blah, 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 blah. But you're not going to do that. You're going to do the opposite. And I listened as the advice came out of her mouth, Peter, and I was so floored. And what my takeaway was, I didn't realize until I had that session with her the degree at which I was emotionally compromised and not able to make good decisions. Even though my gut, I thought, was really smart when I walked in, I realized it wasn't. Then around the same time, I looked at my notes that I'm like, oh my God, I got a great outline here for a book. So all these other books that I read, and I'm a believer, ladies and gentlemen, there isn't a bad book as long as you get 1 or 2 good tips. I read books from attorneys, I read books from therapists, I read books from parenting coordinators and mediators, but there was a gap in the divorce book space. And I tried to fill that gap. And I've authored 2 books on real estate investing a couple of decades ago. So this wasn't my first book. So what's different about my book is I take the counsel of experts like you, Peter, therapists, children's therapists, mediators, and I interviewed countless divorced couples who landed in healthy places. And my book is a collection of tips and strategies from these field experts, and I organize it like a businessman. So about 1/2 of the book is getting through a good divorce. The other half of the book is how to co-parent effectively with somebody who you couldn't live with. So that is not even specific to going through a divorce. That could be used 2 or 3 years after. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it and love to answer any questions you might have.
So what's the nitty gritty? And you can dodge my questions if they're too personal, but I'm assuming part of the book is going to be about your experience going through a divorce personally. Yes?
No, none of it is.
Not at all?
Yeah.
Part of it?
I mean, there's some of my own, the correct answer to your question is some of my own experiences, including my own challenges, clearly indicate to me some chapters that need to be in the book. Okay. But it's not about Andy Heller's divorce, because I'm just one of your many customers. So, and I don't consider myself to be a know-it-all. So one of the things that I went to do is to bring in the counsel from people like yourself, who are experts on specific elements of the divorce process, and organize it and give the counsel to those who are at the different stages of divorce. So it's definitely not but like I would have some challenges. I'm like, oh my goodness. And sometimes I would figure out this by how badly I handled something. And like, I bet another million divorcees are going to go through a similar situation. So that needs to be a chapter. So that's the only part of my own divorce that really had an imprint on this book and the fact that I consider myself to be a pretty reasonable guy. I was not out there to hurt my ex-wife, but I was making a lot of decisions and choices that were not the right ones. So I'm thinking to myself, how are all of these other people that are going through the process who maybe don't have a great therapist in their ear to say, hey, I know what your gut instincts are telling you, but that's not the right thing to do. So my book is kind of like, I don't mean to be corny, but kind of like that Pay It Forward, where I'm trying to help out others, where I kind of figured out myself on trial and error.
So tell me about the title, Take the High Road. What's the motivation for that to be the title?
Well, that's a great question. And I will actually say, if I had to do it again, I might have chosen a different title, because many people are not looking at my book and they're saying, I'm not going to get this book because it's about compromises and giving away the farm. Well, you're an attorney, so I'm sure you're going to appreciate what I'm about to say. Ladies and gentlemen, it's actually the opposite. What I learned, particularly with my discussion with attorneys, is that there is a relationship between the number of conflict points and A, cost, and B, stress. So if you can go to your attorney like Peter and say, okay, I've got a shopping list of 30 things I'm pissed off about or I want to get out of my divorce, but I'm going to focus on the following 3 things that are really, really important to me. On the other 27, you've got my permission to compromise. The point there, everybody, is that taking the high road and compromising wherever you can will do a number of things for you. Number one, it's going to bring your costs down. Okay. Number two, you're going to empower your attorney with focus. He or she's going to know what your objectives are. It's going to make his or her job easier. Okay. It's going to bring your stress down. And all these things should help save you money and get you through the process in a manner that's healthier. And you win points. I mean, you're in sense, you're going to be compromising in areas that are less important to you. So you can actually be focused on the areas that are more important to you. So it will be, and we human beings tend to process things in quantity. So it may be received as, oh my goodness, he or she is compromising in so many things. So I'm going to, okay, maybe I'm going to work with them on the 2 or 3 things that are important to them. So it actually helps you out. So it's not about giving away the farm. It's about using compromise and compassion as a strategy to get through the divorce in a manner where it doesn't have the financial impact that some do. And also it does it in a manner where both you and your children can land in a healthier place.
Other than a great attorney, you know, I'm not biased, but I mean, I wear other hats too. What other people / resources did you find critical in your research and or your own divorce? What other personnel do you need around you to make the process, you know,
I would give you,
comfortable?
That's a fantastic question. And one actually, I don't think I've ever been asked that in any other podcast I've done. So I think it's a brilliant question. I'll give you 3 persons besides a very good attorney. Number one, if you can't afford it, a personal therapist, but not just a personal therapist. Find someone who deals with divorced men. Find someone who deals specifically with divorced women. So that therapist can be a particularly valuable rudder for you and your situation. Number 2, a children's therapist. This is so important, guys. And I'll give it to you we talk about this in the book in a number of chapters. You typically have your own drama that you're dealing with. So we can't, in life, everybody, be the disruptors and the correctors. The children need an advocate that's specific to their own needs, while you are dealing with your own drama and getting yourself into a healthy place. So, and there are different types of children's therapists. We talk about this in the book, but we'll leave it for now at a child's therapist. The
Okay.
third is that we highly recommend, if you have children, to enlist the aid of a co-parent counselor. Okay. The co-parent counselor can also help you, if you haven't got divorced yet, to finalize a robust, fair, and effective co-parenting plan that will go into your MSA.
Right.
But until that point occurs, the co-parenting counselor can help you reach agreement with somebody who you can't live with to make decisions to raise your kids, because your kid's life is not going to pause for the 1, 2, or 3 years you need to get through your divorce process. In fact, there's an argument to be made that may be the most important years and months of parenting. So bringing in a third party who doesn't really care about what you want. They don't care about what your ex-to-be wants. They care about what's in the highest and best interests of your children. That's a gift that, frankly, your children will be thanking you typically for years to come when they're adults.
Yeah, those sound like critical roles. I'm familiar with certainly the therapist piece. I mean, in Illinois, we have something called a parenting coordinator. I would imagine that might be similar to the verbiage you used of a co-parent counselor.
It's the same. Yeah, it can be the same. I think in the states, the different states that we're in, the different provinces in Canada, there's some gray area and overlap. The short answer is that typically a parenting coordinator, parenting counselor, is typically a therapist who, as part or all of their practice, has chosen to focus on helping parents who are separating from a one household environment to a two household environment come up with a plan to parent your children in a far different world that you envisioned when you brought these kids into the world, and to do it in a manner that no matter how challenging it is with your current spouse, your soon-to-be ex, your children are being less impacted by that, and decisions are still being made in their highest and best interests, because you still need to parent your children while you're getting divorced. So typically they're a guide. And an example of the way it might look, Peter, is so let's say you and I are getting divorced, we're not getting along. All right, so we go and find a co-parenting counselor who will meet with us once a month. And we each go in there with our list of things, decisions that have to be made to raise our kids effectively. Because the other thing that happens typically during divorce is communication with your spouse is at a low point during the months around separation. So, but you have to be able to communicate and have some boundaries around this communication while you're raising your children. So you meet once a month, you go through the things that you need to talk about, younger children, what activities they're in, how the exchange can be made between households, what's the life like in each household, summer camps, and then as you get older, you can be talking about things like religion, you can be talking about dating, you can be talking about technology, and reaching agreements so your children don't feel there's a set of rules in dad's house and a set of rules in mom's house. You want to have that kind of also going together. And then the way it typically plays out, the way you want to play out is, okay, I couldn't reach agreement on what color the sky is with my ex, but 6 months later, we're reaching agreement on some things. So we changed the frequency of these meetings from once a month to once every 6 weeks. A year later, every second month. A year after that, once a quarter, and after that, as needed. That's a normal evolution of this, of the use of a co-parenting coordinator and counselor. And I can say, like in my own divorce, we did have this. And we were so confident in this woman. She handled me masterfully. She handled my ex fantastic. that we actually hired her to draft the parenting plan that became part of the divorce document.
Mhm. I appreciate the fact that I think 2 out of the 4 people you mentioned, right, therapist for you as a litigant or right, husband or wife, and then the children's therapist, basically 2 out of the 3 people you mentioned are basically child focused pieces or professionals, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think an earlier statement you made was just kind of like, you're right, when you're going through, let's call it the tumult, or the wavy ocean. I like to swim in the ocean quite a bit. You're really not in a position to really be all there for your children. So bringing on these other people, I mean, I remember going to an event once, and one of the speakers was Pete Rose's son, actually, who was a minor league baseball player, I think, at the time. And I remember him talking about the fact that his parents' divorce was the worst event of his life. That's one thing that's always stuck with me, and just kind of handling it properly from the kid's perspective. And then also just kind of the psychological brain research on just like how the stress and like the executive function of kids is, right. If the stress isn't managed well, like that can stick with a kid like for life, right? You're like an anxious child because my parents' divorce wasn't handled right, and I'm still anxious when I'm 35 because of that. So I don't know if there's a question in there, but I appreciate the child focus, because all that what I just said is absolutely real.
There's a quote in my book that there isn't a question there, but I think it's a great thing that you and I are talking about. And there's a quote in my book from one of the interviewees and it was just one of the most powerful quotes that I got when I put this book together. And he said, Andy, we adults will eventually recover from our collapsed marriage. The children never do.
Mm-hmm.
So what I took away from that is that means we parents have a massive responsibility. That if it's your last dime, you give a child the advocate that he or she needs to land in a place where they're as less affected by your divorce as possible. And I did hear things during the interviews, comments such as, well, we really can't afford it. I will push back. First of all, the one thing I did learn in putting this book together, there's so many services out there that are on different fee schedules. Okay. Mm-hmm. And even some complimentary services you can get through sometimes your religious affiliation. You can't afford not to, ladies and gentlemen, because if little Johnny screws up and he's 6 years old and he has a temper tantrum, you might have to he throws out a rock through a neighbor's window, you might have to pay to fix the window. Little Johnny's like an adult and is screwing up, you might find an illegitimate child, bankruptcy, bigger kids, bigger problems. So you got to address these issues when it's actually less expensive when the kids are young, so they're able or more likely to have a normal adulthood. And the steps and the choices that you're making as you're separating could be arguably the most important choices you'll be making as a parent.
Yeah, 100% agreed. Hey, Andy, so if I cut a divorce into before, during, and after, how about 1 or 2 tips with regard to each of those categories? I'm thinking about or entering into a possible divorce situation. Things to do or not do in that part of the process.
Okay, so it's funny, my book is about divorcing with compassion the right way. Right. The very first chapter in the book is divorce the right path for me? So okay. The answer to your question is a personal assessment. We live in a society, Peter, I call it a throwaway society, instant gratification. Right. So many marriages are stale or challenged. They're not broken. So step number one is to try to assess really where your marriage is, so you can understand what the right path is. Sometimes that's very clear. A lot of times it's not. So before divorce, I think the need for personal assessment of really where your relationship is absolutely a vital thing to do. During divorce,
Yep.
It's what we've talked about. During divorce, bring in the third parties into your life that can have benefits for you and your former spouse, and most importantly, your children, because you don't have the ability yourself to do that. There's too many emotions percolating. Even if you're amicable with your spouse as you are separating, there's lots of emotions. I mean, typically you're worrying about getting skills that your spouse, like, if for me, actually, Peter, and a great example is my former wife was a superb homemaker. Okay, I was involved, Dad, but I was like a super worker. All right. So I worked,
Right.
I ran successful businesses. When we split up, my kids were gluten-free, nut-free, and lactose intolerant. And I didn't know how to cook. So imagine how to learn and how to cook with those restrictions. I mean, I was so stressed out about that. I wouldn't want to send my kids to the hospital. So, and then you could have another situation where your former partner, where he or she managed the household finances. All right. So you've got to learn to manage a budget, even if it's not in your skill set.
Right.
So during divorce, I find assessing what skills you need to be able to manage a household confidently is something that is very often overlooked. And then they get into the situation where they're in their own household, and they realize all these things that they were not ready for, that, you know, we can say on some level we took for granted with our former partner, that
Right.
he or she did a great job with those skills. And it doesn't mean, for example, going back to cooking, that you've got to become Julia Childs, but you want to be able to cook a healthy meal that is within the dietary restrictions of the children. Post-divorce, I think the biggest challenge is co-parenting with somebody you couldn't live with. All right. And I would say there, and I will say in my book, I give you a lot of tips around how to do this, but set up a structure where you can communicate effectively and make decisions with your former spouse, even if communications with that former spouse are challenging. So structure, by that I mean there are tools out there called Family Wizard. There are basically like private email and expense management portals where you can communicate and make these decisions within that. So coming up with the structure that works for you and your children and your former partner is not an easy thing to do, everybody, but it's necessary.
Yeah, good tips. The life skills, and I mean, I that seems obvious, but I guess I'm married, and I mean, I suppose at some level I take my wife for granted a good bit, because yeah, I mean, I can't, you know, I'm not sure how I would handle our family budget, not to mention the cooking if we split. But well, Andy, thanks so much for your time. Why don't we wrap with a couple, just maybe bullets? What was a big surprise, unexpected thing you learned either in the book or in your divorce?
Well, I can do it in both.
Let's go.
It typically gets better. There's a saying I use in the book a lot: divorce is a marathon, not a sprint. You think during the separation, things are typically at the highest level of being toxic with your ex. All right. It's really challenging so often to get basic things accomplished. If you follow some of the guidance that I'm giving you, it will get better, even if it doesn't seem that way. And so be patient, everybody. So another great example is like custody, all right? Let's say,
Right.
so there's a story in the book I talk about is involved dad who traveled. The mom was a stay-at-home mom. They split up, and the dad recognized that, oh man, and he was a good dad, involved dad. But the problem was the children were used to being alone with mom when he traveled on business. Being alone with dad was an entirely new phenomenon for him.
Right.
And he realized he had to make some professional adjustments. So he, even though he wanted 50% custody out of the gate, he got about 25. And they coordinated this. This is a great story. They coordinated a schedule together with the children's therapist. So based on how well the kids were adjusting, that, for example, at 3 months, but no later than 6 months, the 25% will go to 35%. 6 months, no later than 12 months, the 35% will go to 40. And then 12 months, no later than 18, it will go to a year. Sorry, 50-50.
Right.
So the buffer there, the range, because we didn't know how the kids would adjust, it gave the therapist a lot of room to work with. Okay. And so the decisions were made in the children's best interest. And this is where the dad got his 50%, but he was patient and got it at a time when the children were able to handle that time with dad instead of boom, like a light switch. So recognizing that the divorce, let me take what I just said and put it in a couple sentences, Peter.
Yep.
We have visions as we're splitting up of how we want our life to look. And that's actually very healthy. Achieving those visions is not something that has to happen the day after you pen and sign your MSA. It can look like that 12 or 18 months down the road. So having that vision is very healthy. Being patient and letting your children and letting life and even your relationship with your ex catch up to where you can achieve that vision is very healthy.
So, okay, I hear it gets better. I like that. I just had a divorce trial maybe 2 weeks ago, and one of the parties, I feel like he still hasn't kind of accepted that the marriage is over. And well, it's beyond my skill set probably to do some of the counseling and mental health work, but I feel like I do see, right, I obviously know the legal process, but in terms of sort of that handling grief and that sort of process, the mourning process, really, you see people at all different stages, even though maybe they're in different places in that process, although they might be in the same place in the legal process. So things will get better. How about sort of is there a common mistake you see or have heard people make, and maybe your counsel might help the next person avoid it?
Well, yeah, I got a great tip, and it's one of the simplest but most powerful tips in my book. One of the compliments I've gotten on my book, Peter, is I inject business skills for high conflict situations into a divorce book. One of the most powerful business skill that I've ever used. And by the way, before I put this into the book, I ran it by my therapist, who said, Andy, this is going to be one of the best tips you have in your book. It's called the time card. All right. And it's a business tool where we are dealing with such things that don't need to be decided on today. And we punt. We make the decision a week later, a couple of days later, or a month later. Now, the reason for that is that when we're emotionally agitated, we don't make really good decisions. And having the time to think through things, we end up making better decisions. So in the book, I introduce how and when to use a time card. So for example, you're dealing with a logistical situation for a pickup of a child. That needs to be decided right now. But little Johnny's complaining about going to ballet. He doesn't want to go to ballet. His mom thinks it'd be good for him, or dad thinks it'd be good for him. All right, well, I'm in disagreement. Let's punt. Let's wait 2 weeks and we can talk about that later. And the beauty about this tip, everybody, is with children, a lot of these issues solve themselves. So then you have one less thing to deal with your ex. I introduced that example about little Johnny and ballet, and that was an actual result of an actual interview. And what happened was the dad did not want to bring it up, all right, because he knew that this was something that his wife or ex-wife wanted. He waited a few weeks, and guess what happened? The complaints in both households were so fierce that the decision was made for him. The ex-wife said, you know what? I don't want to hear that anymore. I'm fine. Let's move on to basketball. So that was a great example of when the time card could be used effectively, and with children, what is important, what is an SOS issue, that's like a moving target, Peter. And what's an SOS issue today could be completely a non-issue in 3 weeks. So the other thing that's doing is, by using a time card, you're reducing the number of things that you have to talk to your ex about right away. And that also can be very healthy.
Yeah, I like that as a general decision-making principle. Everything really isn't an urgent, everything isn't in the urgent and important box, right?
Yes, yes, exactly. So
yeah,
yeah, that's not a tool particular to the divorce. It's a
Mhm.
business and crisis management tool that's used very effectively in the business world. That is actually, I think, a home run in divorce communication.
So Andy, just in wrapping up, who's your book? Who's the ideal reader for your book, and where can people find your book and learn more about you?
Sure. Well, thank you. So the ideal reader is a man or woman who is either thinking about divorce, going through divorce, or has been divorced. Again, as I said earlier, about 50% deals with co-parenting, and that does not end. So if you already are divorced, I believe my book can be super helpful. And so that's the target audience. It's not gender specific, even though I'm a man who wrote it. And you can find the book on Amazon. We just launched the book, second edition of the book last month. Just go and Google Take the High Road and put divorce or put Heller, Heller, and the book will pop up. And we also have a website, www.takethehighroaddivorce.com.
Well, that's awesome, Andy. Yeah, I'm going to check it out specifically for more tips on handling the post-divorce, because I feel like in my world, or just societally, you hear of like how to think about what going into the divorce and then during the case. But I feel like, and maybe, thinking as a lawyer and law firm, then it's like the case is over. It's just kind of over. But, the person, right, the person who got divorced, right, in a sense, that might be the longest part, right, the post-divorce. And yet I feel like oftentimes, it's just like the case is over and it's over, but it's not really over, correct?
Correct. And I would love to come back and be your guest in a few months after you've read it, because there's one chapter I think my spidey sense tells me you're going to love, and it's when to roll up the sleeve. So I'm talking here about taking the high road, divorce with compassion for yourself and your family. And you certainly want to try to take the high road. All right. But there are some times where the solution is going to be by utilizing a professional like Peter. And but recognizing which situations are in that bucket and which ones are not, that's really important. So yeah, so anyhow, I think you'll enjoy that in particular, Peter.
All right. Andy, thanks again for your time. So appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me as a guest. Good luck.